My name is Michael, and I'm an emeritus professor. I retired in 2005 from the law school, had been in the law school from teaching here from 1967 till 2005, but on issues dealing with children, and with a fair amount of time in and out of government as well as Stanford, running children's programs in San Francisco and in Washington, D.C. and stuff.
I'm Ashley McCullough. I majored in sociology and graduated in 2009 from here, and I work in Alameda County social services with young people in foster care. While I was a student here, I was the student director of the Stanford Foster Care College Project, whose mission is to bring higher education within the reach of all foster youth.
Rick Banks, individually designed major from a long time ago, co-term in education, and now at the law school.
Awesome. So I'll just provide a brief overview of kind of the numbers of children in foster care now. So in California, there are over 500,000 children, black children in California, and about almost 13,000 of them are in foster care. So about 2.5% of them are in foster care. And that is in comparison to about 2.5 million white children in California, and 13,500 of them are in foster care, so 0.05%. So there's a higher percentage, much higher percentage of black children in foster care in California. And nationwide, blacks are 2.7 times more likely to enter care than white children. And they leave foster care, which is supposed to be temporary placement until your family can be reunified, or you can therefore be adopted or find some kind of permanency. And black children leave at a rate 30% slower than other children. So we're going to talk today, first I'll address Ms. King. And we have Ms. King here. She is the executive director of the Black Adoption and Placement Center in Oakland. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself a little bit more.
Oh, yes, you did a very good job. That's who I am.
Thank you.
And our agency is in Oakland. We serve 14 Northern California counties.
Great.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you guys very simply, then I'll have some questions for you later. I'll start with you, Professor Wald, but why are black children overrepresented in foster care? And that's the same question for all of you.
Okay. So, children go into foster care because of a report to a Child Protective Services agency that by somebody who believes that they're in some sort of danger, physical danger, danger from sexual abuse, or not being adequately cared for at home. And then if they cannot be protected in their own home, if it's decided they're in some sort of danger and they cannot be protected in their own home, the agency decides that they cannot, they'll be put in foster care. And they're supposed to either be, if put in foster care, the goal is to either reunify with their families under a time period as quickly as possible, or to come into some other kind of placement, which would be adoption preferably, or guardianship, which is a legal status that gives you a kind of permanency there. This issue is very complicated, so a simple answer is not easy to the whole issue. But I'm going to give a simple answer, and it may generate. There are two reasons that African American children have disproportionately in foster care. There's a higher number of entrances into foster care, which I think is actually primarily driven by a greater amount of risk. Not by policies of agencies, but by more children who are at risk. And we can go into that in some detail.
You mean at risk in their homes?
In their homes,
okay.
Right. and then exits, and the other thing is that there is how many kids exit and how rapidly they exit. I think that there are that the numbers of African American kids in foster care are high, or for two reasons. One, that there's not enough efforts around exiting, and two, that a larger percentage are with family members, where the family members are choosing either not to be guardians or adopt, and so they're longer term in foster care, partly because we don't subsidize guardianships adequately and find the vehicles to help extended family provide stability for the children.
Thank you. Ashley?
I know that this is a discussion, but I just want to say to the audience, if you have questions about some of the words that we might use, like guardianship, please ask, because I have a feeling that's going to come up a lot. I think, like he said, there are two reasons why Black children are disproportionately represented in the foster care system. One is the risk factor, but I'm going to bring it further and say poverty, essentially. Poverty and hopelessness really, contribute to abusive factors. Like, most children who are in foster youth come into care because of abuse or neglect. And so I think, honestly, it has to do with the risk and poverty. And the second reason, I think, is actually a value system of the agencies that are taking children from their homes. The best way I can describe it is to give an example. For example, if I'm a social worker and I come into your home and I believe that, every child should have 10 toys, a bed, in their own bathroom, and I come into your home and you only have 2 toys, a bed, and a bathroom, then I'm going to take you from their home because by my standards, you're being neglected. So I think that's the other reason why there are a lot of Black children, because there's kind of like the self-selecting, like, I'm assuming that you're not going to be able to take care of your children based on my standards. And so I don't know what other panelists have to say, but I think those are the two reasons why Black children are in foster care. Overrepresented.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to the discussion here. So I'll just add, I agree with much of what was said, but I'll just add that the backdrop for all of this is that we have a society where we put a lot of responsibilities onto parents and onto families, right? So, and at the same time as we've done that, we've had inequality that's been growing in the society, right? So we have these great extremes of inequality. Some people who are very affluent and very well off, and then other families who are very poor and impoverished and lack opportunities. And we don't provide as many supports for families as we might. Right? That is, we might provide, you can imagine a whole slew of things that we might do even before children are born to make it less likely that their parents would be unable to take care of them, right? But we don't provide as many supports, beginning with prenatal care and on into, after the child is born, and then preschool and early child education and parent education. We don't provide all those sorts of supports, which some other countries do, and so that means that if the parents can't do the job, then the job is not going to be done. And there's a big debate about to what extent the disproportionate representation of Black children in foster care represents just that inequality in society, right? That Black kids are just in worse circumstances, basically. That's one way to put the risk idea is I just think Black kids are in worse circumstances versus, what extent is there is it a matter of social work or decision making or institutional policies that we might think are biased or unfair or slanted against African Americans? Again, there's no one answer. And in most cases, I would suspect that both of those are going to play some role. But we can't ignore the fact that we have great inequalities in the society, that African Americans are on the wrong side of those inequalities, and that we don't provide resources to families that would make it easier for them to take care of the children.
I agree with all of my colleagues, but I would like to add, the child welfare system started back in the 1800s, about 1865, and it was designed not for children of color, but actually children that had been orphaned by the war. And so we get this term put up for adoption. And we have kept pretty much the same system, if you can believe it or not. It's kind of like the first adoption agencies were, you know, Catholic charities, Children's Home Society, and these were all lovely agencies and continue to be for the population of children that they were serving initially. But African American children and children of color came into the foster care system basically in the late 60s and early 70s after the Vietnam War. And you know, historically African American families always put that extra plate on the table and would send their kids from the south to the north, and we really had an extended family model. But due to the ills of society, when drugs came on the scene, and not just drugs, because drugs has been around for a long time, the particular kinds of drugs that were awfully addictive, and you couldn't get them off drugs very easily, impacted the very fabric, I believe, of African American families. And what began to happen was when the fabric of our families began to tear apart, because we couldn't rely on extended family members, because let's face it, parents became afraid of their own daughters and sons, and so it was no longer a viable option. And as our kids entered the system pretty much at the same rate as other children, for me the huge problem was that we were not exiting the system. So that when you talk about disproportionality, even though we do not comprise a large percentage of the overall population, as my colleagues alluded to, because of societal ills and lack of access to resources that other families would have to either retain their children, because it's Child Protective Services that makes that evaluation of whether children can stay in their home or not, CPS. And one of my colleagues really noted something very powerful: evaluation. And we must look at the evaluation process. That's why I said the system of evaluating what makes a good family. And when we haven't done our homework very well about making certain adjustments, and sometimes it's convoluted through racism and cultural norms and all of that, and that is very true, but also just the standard of living. Because if people define families or operationalize families as a whole different view than the people that are living out their lives, there comes the risk. Because as you said, what's your name again? Ashley. Ashley, as Ashley indicated, you know, if a worker goes into the home, and it is a social worker that makes that determination, depending on their level of skill, not just of risk, but understanding the makeup. On forms, we used to say, who's in your household? And for a lot of African American families that were at the poverty line or just above the poverty line, we saw nothing wrong with sharing a bedroom, and an aunt and an uncle and someone else being in the home. But if that's viewed as some type of pathology, to me, that really impacts when you talk about, but hey, but why is there so many kids in? I think we have to begin to look at some of these issues. And even though that's a bird's eye view, and I don't think it's just two reasons, by the way, I think it's multiple issues that come into play. But that's basically what I would say.
I would just, if I could add, I think it would be good to make it, I mean, we've talked in mostly generalities, it would be good if we could make it more concrete, maybe to talk about cases where, where, for example, you think that you know, to be crude, right, that a black social worker would leave the child in the home and a white social worker would want to take the child from the home based on their different understandings of how families should operate, right? Because most children are not, they're probably not being removed from the home because they're sharing a bedroom.
No, and that's pretty naive, but
so it's, you know, we should
that is pretty naive.
Concrete, right?
Yeah.
Talk about what we, I mean, what are the actual circumstances in which children are living that then result in.
And I would like to piggyback on what you said, because it isn't a matter of color. I'm in the field all the time. I've worked in the field now for close to 30 some years. And so it's not because the social worker is African American or the social worker is white, but it's how we're trained to view family. So I always look, and I take the opportunity to go to a lot of universities, and I bring in the practical side of the work, because I think our academics is great in terms of the intellectualizing of what happens in families, but it's not really great on the practicum side. So when workers go in, black, white, Asian, into homes, they're almost shocked at what they see because they haven't been prepared for the population of families that are not like them. And I really like this whole idea about the economic divide, because black people are not monolithic, meaning that we don't all have the same incomes or social class, and all of that plays into what is called bias, and all of those kind of issues come up. So you're not getting necessarily a great worker because a black social worker went into a home to do the evaluation. And so I want to make sure that that point was made clear.
Well, I'm glad you're talking about this, because this is a great segue to my next question. I was looking up some data from the University of Chicago Chapin Hall, which does a lot of research on this. They just found in 2011 that poverty rates and maltreatment rates, they do go up. That they are in higher in communities with higher rates of poverty, there are more maltreatment rates. But they found that when race is considered, there is low black child maltreatment rate in states with higher black child poverty rates. So it's actually the opposite when race is considered.
You mean that social workers were bringing fewer black children into the system
in higher poverty rates?
More poverty.
More poverty.
Fewer children than you would expect given the poverty rate.
Given the poverty rate.
So this is sort of, if you control for poverty, the rate of black children in the system is actually much lower.
Much lower in higher poverty rates, exactly. So for you guys, I want to know why you think that is. I mean, that could allude to bias. That could allude to, I mean, what is, right?
It's a methodological problem in the Chapin Hall research. Okay.
Go ahead.
But I mean, if you look within all of those states, let's take Mississippi or Alabama or Louisiana as the high poverty, low placement states.
Right.
You would find within those states that the kids who come into foster care are poor. They're the poorest of the poor within those states. Just like the kids who come into foster care in other states are poor compared to others. And that it's only because those states don't actually invest very much in trying to protect children at all, or in child welfare services and in other kinds of services, that they have low rates. But it is actually partly their failure to actually do things for a lot of children.
So inequality in how states deal with child welfare.
How they deal with child welfare, but then within each state, and that the relationship between poverty and the likelihood of being in the child welfare system at all or put into foster care is enormous. That
I mean, you could even say that the only children in the system, for the most part, are poor children,
except for sexually abused children.
But
not even.
The percentage of children of middle class parents, right, college educated parents who are in the system is vanishingly small.
Right.
Right.
In every one of those states.
It's vanishingly small. This is, for the most part, this is a system that focuses on children who are disadvantaged economically, right? Not exclusively, but for the most part.
Right.
How much is that tied into the? And you guys can explain AFDC, but the way 4E funding happens. I mean, how much is that? I mean, would you think, an increase in less poor children if it wasn't tied to the 1996 standard of poverty for welfare to get 4E funds down? I mean, that's a little bit of a wonky question, but I mean, maybe you guys could explain what AFDC is and then answer.
So Title 4E refers to a law that was passed the Children and Families Safe Adoption Act of 1996, I believe. And basically the Title 40 is flexible spending money, flexible funding, so that states and counties can spend a certain portion of money how they want, as opposed to being tied to criteria that if your family is 200% below the poverty line, then you're entitled to this. This money allows you to help the gamut of families, as an example. So can you repeat your question?
No, I'm just wondering, because the standard from 1996 says that, you know, to get federal funds, the biological family needs to be below a certain income level, which was the welfare level before welfare was turned into a block grant. So my question is you know.
So the basic problem that ties into federal money in the child welfare system overwhelmingly only goes to support children in foster care. It doesn't, we don't spend federal money on services to prevent people or services. That's state money. And Title 40 is a foster care grant. It does it for low-income children. It provides money to subsidize their being in foster care. Historically, that has meant that many people believe that more poor children will come into foster care because there's money for them if they go into foster care, and there's not money if they're left in their own home, and you try to provide services to their families. So that the structure of federal funding and 40 has led to that. It doesn't do that to any greater degree for any particular race. It does it on an economic basis because of the nature of the structure. And that didn't change much after the 96 amendments. I mean, that's always been a historic problem.
So should more money go to prevention? Would that help reduce maltreatment rates and therefore reduce the number of children in care?
I really think that that's a powerful question, because you know, I think it's really easier and more comfortable to talk about it as a pure economic problem. But if we define, and not define, but if we put support, financial support for families not being able to be above a certain line, and that's when you get support, I mean, what are we really saying? So I would say that it has always been that. Right now, Black Adoption Placement and Research Center is engaged in a project called Circle of Care. And when I started this project, it was really interesting to me because it's a project helping homeless mothers and fathers that are parents of 0 to 5 children, backed by First 5 funding. And when I did some research, I don't know what my idea was, but I really didn't think I would see such young mothers that were homeless with their kids. And not only young, most of them, over 75% of them, had graduated from the foster care system. So that spoke loudly to me about what we support and what we don't. And I was like, how can we break this cycle of recidivism? Because they went through the foster care system, and now their children 0 to 5 are at most risk for entering the foster care system. And so I said, you know, we have to look at this. So I think you're speaking loudly to an imbalance of the way we view, which does come into, whether we say it or not, it does come into the way we define what we're looking at and our perspective on it.
Yeah, just to talk about the data a little bit, I do agree. However, it just speaks to the fact that there are children who are abused and neglected every day who are not Black, who do not come into the foster care system because whoever is evaluating their homes overlooks certain things, or, you know, just their lens is different. But, you know, working with homeless youth, there are a lot of homeless youth, you know, who should have been in foster care, but we're not in foster care because of whatever reason. And so I do think race obviously plays a big part of that, because the whole goal of the child welfare system is to protect children. But there's so many children who are not people of color who are being abused and neglected, but they're not coming into the system. So I just want to throw that out there.
For those children who are in care, and they are in care for a very long time, and Professor Banks, if you can speak to this and anyone else can, what are some of the legal barriers that you would mention for parents to reunify with their children, or for other family members to be reunited with their children? There's a congressional coalition on foster youth, and they had a listening tour in Los Angeles 2 weekends ago when we were there, and we're there. And one of the advocates was talking about how difficult it is for some family members who maybe they had a record, years ago, but if there's anything on you, that says that you were in jail or anything like that, that you're not eligible for that child to be placed in your home. So I'm wondering if there's, what kind of legal barriers, or what is the difficulty with reclaiming children so that they can, exit the foster care system.
Okay. I realize I should punt that to my colleague who works in the field here and then comment.
Sure.
On your observations.
We see all the time, not only on families, especially on families coming forward, the criteria to accept a family as a foster care parent. For most private agencies, you cannot have a felony, and it makes sense that we do not want our children to continue to be in at-risk environments. But I do think that we have to do a better job at looking at all of the factors. I have to explain, not on a daily basis, which I was going to say, but that would be not quite accurate. But very often I'm explaining to families why they cannot be a foster parent because they have a person in their home. It might be an adult son or daughter that has a record. So while they have the space, and that person may just visit the home. They may not even be residing, but because they enter the home, that is one of the barriers. The other barriers that are not, I guess, the other barriers are, the difficulty of families accessing resources for the children that they want to take care of. We explain what community care licensing that governs all of the homes that are eligible to have children in their home. Those standards, I have to explain, they're not Black adoption, placement, and research standards. These are community care licensing standards. And so we spend a great amount of time educating our families how to come in line with those particular limits or barriers so that they are eligible. Because I think that does a greater service than just turning families away and they're not sure. By the way, counties will accept potential foster parents that have felonies. But private agencies don't, because if anything would happen, their particular agency is closed out versus a county institution.
Wow. So let me just say, so it's, I mean, the question of what the standard should be is a difficult one, because if you're out there making the decisions, you might want to exercise a lot of judgment and be able to decide, well, this seems like a good family despite the fact that there's someone who has a felony or there are issues, right? So maybe it's not ideal, but maybe this would be a fine family. And so the individual might want to make those choices. But then when you back up from that and you're setting the policy and you think about, well, we have many different social workers. Would it be desirable to have each of them set their own standards and exercise their discretion? And then you can see, obviously, that some problems could arise, right? Because someone might make the wrong call, or people might apply different standards. And then, whether it's a public agency or a private agency, the most disastrous thing would be to place a child in a situation where something really horrible happens. And the policymaker would have to be risk averse in setting the policy. That is, it would almost be better from the policymaker standpoint to avoid any real horrible thing happening, even if that means that there are a lot of families who might be fine, who would be excluded. But if there's that one family or two families who would do the really horrible thing, you got to get them out of the, you can't have them, a child placed there. So,
and it happens even with
so
those parameters. We're just taking a picture of a family. And I only say that because we do a home study, and then they go through different clearances. And with all of those clearances, it's still no guarantee that that's a safe home. So we worry a lot about that. And I would agree with him that those policies are in place for a reason.
Right. And the problem though is that it's one thing if you check off all the boxes and everything seems fine, but it's not.
It's still not fine.
But it's another thing if it turns out that someone had a conviction for drug trafficking.
Yes.
And then there's a problem, right? Because now you knew about the conviction, and that's impossible to justify after the fact, right? Why did you place a child in this circumstance and there was a risk of danger there? So, so I think it's unfortunate that families who might be okay would be screened out, but it's also almost inevitable. Because this is an area where you do need to have some sort of bright lines, and the felony conviction seems like a pretty reasonable bright line, frankly.
And it's also true that when families of color are given the opportunity to adopt, following those policies, they adopt 4 times their counterpart. So it's not, a lot of times what is happening is when they come to different institutions, they are met with certain biases, not biases of the policy, because that is standard. We're going to do a criminal check, we're going to do a child abuse check, we're going to go out to the home and make sure that it's safe. But what begins to be more of an issue is if they can't get through the front part of the administration of even being accepted. And then on the back end, we have the issues of, what is their psychological background? How do they solve their problems? That's getting into the assessment of the family's strengths and the family's areas of development.
Let me just surface one other issue.
He's been waiting to talk, so
please.
Wald can't talk, and then.
Well, I'm just going to surface the issue. We've been assuming here so far that I think that the black children would only be placed with black foster.
That's not.
We haven't been assuming.
We're going to talk about transracial.
We haven't raised that. Okay.
Oh yeah, we're going to get there.
I thought we were assuming that.
No. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
We're going to get there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, actually, my comment's a little off of that, and I mean, it is a question of what we're going to get to because we're it's almost 1 o'clock. People have questions, and I'm assuming that the people that are here because they're concerned about the African American and other children and the well-being of these systems. So I want to raise a couple of things that may frame some discussion, and preface it by saying I think that in various ways because of a lack of understanding of both culture and of poverty, decision-making in a lot of processes can be biased against poor children and African-American children. And at some level, this has to be seen in a broader context. So there's just a recent the Office of Civil Rights in the Education Department about suspensions and expulsions. I've got the data here, about and dropouts and a range of other issues that talk about it. And I think things can really be done to improve decision making. I work pretty closely with a lawyer, James Bell, who formed an organization called the Hayward Burns Institute that works on juvenile detention. But I want to put it in a different context with that as a background, okay? In 2002, there were 500,000 children born in California, 50,000 of whom were African American children. And there's a professor at Berkeley who has a group that has followed those children until 2009, the 500,000 children. Of those 500,000 children that were born, 15% of all of the children that were born were reported to Child Protective Services by the time they were 7 years of age. A very high number. Most of these are by friends and neighbors, not by official systems. 40% of African American children were reported of that group. Approximately 6 times as many African American children were killed in their homes than any other group proportionately. That the issue of deep-seated poverty to very young, isolated parents in neighborhoods that are dangerous neighborhoods that create a level of stress on the families and children that is really enormous, and that affects every single aspect of development of the children, with impacts of trauma and stress on all of their development, is to me the core social welfare problem. And one can look at disparities all along and talk about it, but we're not going to change by policies or standards about decision making, because African American social workers remove kids to foster care at the same rates as white social workers. That if we don't address that basic poverty, but not just poverty, but the whole set of resources in isolated communities and the violence levels and stuff, and get support services in, we're in for a very bad future for very poor people in our society.
Swallow that. Yeah. Because of time, I want to open this up to questions. I wanted to get to transracial adoption, and I wanted to actually talk about that a little bit too. Just what you think the experience of Black children in foster care is, and if you think that is different than other children in care. You can speak to that briefly, and then kind of. I know you were in a white foster home, right? So if what is that? What was that experience for you? And then you working with youth, what has that been like? What do you think their experience is? And then from Ashley, we'll open it up to questions. Okay.
Okay. So I think that the experience of Black children in foster care, I can only speak about California because that's the state in which I was raised foremost, is that you constantly have strangers in and out of your life. And I think the experience of being a Black kid in foster care is unique because a lot of the adults in your life are not Black, including your foster parents, but your social workers, your teachers, your doctors, et cetera, are not Black. So it's very skewed. When I was growing up in foster care, I lived in a group home, and the majority of the people were in a group home, and I went to a church that was a church of color. But when I moved to a foster home with the white family, my only connection to Black people were at church and not even in the schools that I was raised in. And so I think that being Black in foster care, not only is it stressful because you don't live with your family, you're living with strangers, but it's also weird because you're like the only Black person. And regardless if you live in a home with white people or if you live in a home with other people of color or Black people, you're still the only Black person because all of the adults in your life are not Black. And because of, and obviously I'm being general, I can't speak for everyone else, but because like in the child welfare system, I always think of child social workers, like child welfare workers. It's a privileged job and it's a really tough job, but the only people who can afford to be social workers are middle class white women because they have the time or the resource, because there's not a lot of money. So, and I don't know, all of you are Stanford students, and when I was at Stanford, we had this conversation all the time about the brain drain or being Black and what's our responsibility to the community. Should we go back and be social workers, teachers, etc., you know, all that. But at the same time, we need to make money and we need to get out the hood. You know what I'm saying? So in the social world arena, a lot of the people who work there are not people of color, so it's just awkward.
So I just wanted to come and share my experiences with the foster care system. So when I was 4, my siblings and I were taken out of my mom's home due to her drug abuse and her alcohol addiction, and we were all placed into relative care. And we all were split up amongst family members, but all of my siblings are my half-siblings. So some of us went with, you know, father's family, some of us went with my mom's family. As far as our experiences while growing up in these different households, I still think that relative placement is still, we're still at risk because not all relatives are at the same point where they want to see you succeed and they want to see you go on and do and, you know, age out of the foster care system. And I was in the foster care system when I was 4, and I just aged out on my 21st birthday. No one ever adopted me or took guardianship because of the lack of resources that are available once you take those steps and adopt a child. I mean, medical care is gone. I mean, even as far as me coming to Stanford, I'm from Chicago. The state of Illinois won't cover anything for my education because I went out of state. If I would have stayed in Illinois and went to University of Chicago, which has about the same tuition as Stanford, they would have had to cover everything. So it's just little loopholes in the system that I see, and it makes me so. Even social workers, I've had social workers say to me, "Oh, well, Brittany, you're like the poster child, but you don't think about my siblings. My oldest, like all of my brothers joined gangs. My oldest brother was murdered. The next brother after that is currently in prison right now. So I'm the poster child, but you don't make house visits to my family, and you don't do sibling visits because I'm doing okay." And I think a lot of the problem starts with social workers, and when they, you know, make these visits, and most of the time they aren't even making these home visits. They aren't doing these sibling visits. That's why kids can't age out of the foster care system and be successful because they don't have the resources. And yeah, I just want to leave it at that. I'm really biased against the foster care system, and I have a lot of anger. And that, I mean, I guess that I've changed my whole career path from wanting to go into medicine into now wanting to pursue a master's in social work because there are so many people who don't see what the actual need is because they haven't really lived those experiences. And even with my, you know, recent decision to go into social work, I've gotten a lot of, "Oh, you're not, you know, emotionally stable enough. You shouldn't go into it because you've been in it." I mean, that's part of my healing. And the fact that, you know, people don't even know my story and can't, I mean, I don't think I have to hide anything. And Jan was like, "You mind if I put your name on emails?" Absolutely put my name on emails because I want people to see me and not say, "Oh, if she can do it, I can do it too." But what does she have that I don't have that I need in order to make those steps, in order to go on and be successful? So I just want to say that. And I'm going to run out because I have to go to class. Thank you guys.
Go ahead.
I had a very similar experience to Brittany. I was also in the foster system, relative care also. And like when I did see that email with Brittany's name on it, I was like, wow, like that's really cold. And I know last year as a freshman, like we did cross the line, and Jan said like whoever was in foster care crossed the line. I was the only one crossing, and I felt very embarrassed at the time. But that's just a side note. But I just wanted to ask a question. Like how often do you guys see like students, like young children going into relative care in the Black community as opposed to going and splitting up with families that they don't know?
That question is a harder one for me because our agency doesn't do relative foster care. We do non-relative foster care, and we do, so I can't really speak to that. But I always encourage, when it's safe and possible, it's great for children to be able to keep their connection. But not every connection is a healthy connection just because it's a relative. So it needs to be monitored, and I appreciate your comments because the resources are not there to support healthy family living when relatives take care of you, but non-relatives can get a lot of money. So when I talk about, I didn't use these words earlier, but to me, the child welfare system, we have to first, like any thing that is that you're struggling with, we have to admit that it is broken and it needs to have some, it needs fixing. And we're doing that every day, and I appreciate what Ashley's saying, because it's going to take time. But how can you be an ally is helping to fix that child welfare system. When a young person comes into your office, when you're that doctor, you don't have to necessarily mentor by spending 2 weekends with the child, which would be awesome, but you can also say, you know what, I'm doing this and so can you. You know, just modeling and taking extra time to talk to the parent that's caring for the child. That's another thing, is that Ashley was right on when she said relationship is everything. So being willing to make that relationship work, whether you're an engineer or whether you're a social worker, every time you show up, you're a model and an example. And our 30th anniversary is coming up next year. And so now we have adult adoptees that have children of their own, and we have foster care. So I can't wait, because it will be a community event. And I would love for students from Stanford and from all over to see what does happen, because you'll hear from the people that were in the system just like Ashley. And I think they have the most to offer in terms of changing the system.
Right.
Like you're gonna do.
Yes, exactly. So I was going to give you my card, and anybody else that wants it. But I think it's such a great way to support and encourage young people to go into child welfare. And no, you don't get rich off of it, but oftentimes you get purpose out of it, and you never can pay for that.
That's a great way to end it, unless somebody else has something pressing they'd like to say. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you to our panelists for being here and offering their expertise.